Hello, Twitch. Oh no, my panel bar is all messed up. Sorry, that was too energetic. This is a peaceful stream. This is a peaceful fireside, copyright-free Christmas Yule log. No, there's a commercial. Curse you, YouTube. You guaranteed me this was copyright-free. Okay. Okay, no, we're back to being chill. I also guarantee you that one of my ears is going to fall off before we get into this. Okay, so I'm hoping I have some fantasy literature fans in the audience because, of course, if we're getting elfed up for a Christmas charity stream, we should probably talk about elves. And, I mean, there's a book called The Blood of Elves, which I read a few months ago. I read it over the summer. And I thought Andrzej Sapkowski's take on elves was super refreshing. So I kind of wanted to talk about that and read some excerpts from the book and talk about elves and fantasy in general. And I'm hoping that, chat, you will join me in this discussion so it's less of like a lecture, because I am not a literary scholar by any capacity, right? You know me. How are the audio levels real quick? Can you hear the crackling fire? Was it worth getting a commercial? So terrible. Yes, I want to talk about the representation of elves in Andrzej Sapkowski's work a little bit tonight, in addition to talking about elves in fantasy and in folklore in general. Let's see. Can't really hear it. Well, that doesn't help. Okay. I turned it up. Maybe too loud. Maybe now all you can hear is the fire. I should also probably move my mic. I was trying to show a coworker Isabel's cone of shame earlier, so I ended up moving my mic in a way that was not helpful. Okay, good. Okay, can you hear the fire as well? This is a very relaxed stream. I'm trying to be peaceful and calm and not energetic, even though I get super hyper on stream.
All right.
Ah, yes. Hey, thanks for the follow, Alicia214. Welcome to the stream. Let's get started. So I don't want to do obviously, okay. Let's talk about a few things first. First of all, let's talk about, first of all, let's pause that. That's me. I am doing this stream and all my streams this month of December for Feeding America. So Feeding America is, that's great. I look amazing there. Feeding America is an amazing charity that here in the United States helps those who are food insecure or short on food make ends meet and fill their bellies. So I can think of no better charity in December than Feeding America to support. I am totally flabbergasted that in just 2 streams, I mean, this will be the 3rd, we've raised $410, which is just incredible. You donate through Tiltify. And thank you. Yes, I am looking very elfish, but I'm also not loving how shiny. I have no makeup on. Let's start there. So my face is super shiny and it's causing this fun thing to happen that I don't love. I'm going to try and fix my face, my webcam. So Feeding America is an amazing charity, and I personally support them monthly with a monthly donation out of my own pocket. And I'm here charity begging you all to help me support them. This has been a rough year for a lot of folks. Hey, maybe yourself included, right? If you can't donate now, that's fine. I totally understand. It's been a super rough year for everyone. But if you can, it's a good charity to donate to. And using Tiltify, you donate directly to the charity. The money doesn't go to me at all. It never touches my hands because, you know, I'm an untrustworthy elf here. And it's tax deductible if you're in the United States. So Feeding America is a 501(c) charity. They are accredited by the Better Business Bureau. I've checked them out thoroughly. They're a very good charity to support. Your money does actually go to helping people. So, okay, there's my charity spiel, my charity begging. If we hit $500, we're really close. We're $90 away from paying $500. I will do a Krampus cosplay. And I don't quite know what that looks like yet, but I think I have all the materials for it already, which is depressing. Anyway, so we're going to keep doing this for the rest of the month, and it's going to be awesome. And the link, oh, good call. If you type !donate into chat, it should come up. There's a ton of really fun rewards on there that you can purchase, right? I'll do stupid stuff on stream for your entertainment value. And there's fun milestones. We've already unlocked a baking stream, so I'm going to show you how to make marranito cookies next Monday, a week from today. And if we hit the full $1,000, I'll play Phasmophobia on stream. Stop it with the advertisements, YouTube. We talked about this. They kind of think oh, better not get DCMA'd for this. I looked up a copyright-free Yule log. I guess I didn't really get one. Okay. So we're going to start off. I'm just reading excerpts from the book, and then we're going to discuss them. And of course, if at any time you have anything you would like to add to the discussion, please do. I think it's really interesting that the first mention of elves is on page 10. So this particular book, this is the first book in the Witcher series, if you're going by when they were written. I believe there are additional books that are sort of like prequels that I have not yet read. So in this, Dandelion, also known as, what do they call him in the Netflix series? They call him something different. Chat, I'm relying on you. Tell me what they call Dandelion in the Netflix series. But Dandelion is singing a song about the Witcher and Yennefer. And there is a what? Holy crap. Thank you so much. We just hit another milestone. Thank you so much, Kirk. I am totally floored by your very generous donation before you even heard my terrible reading voice on this. But did you want a reward? Okay, it doesn't notify me. I'll check later. I don't see that you selected a reward, so I probably don't have to chug a load of milk on stream right now, which is good. Your donation means so much to Feeding America and to me personally, and now I get to cosplay as Krampus. I mean, that's a reward, right? It's gonna be awful. I'm thinking if I could like source a goat beard, maybe like dress like this while I'm cooking my marranito cookies. Okay, so here's the first mention of elves in the book on page 10 if you're following along at home. Dandelion, again, is singing to a group of travelers. So the book says, the assembly stirred to life. The merchants traveling in the caravan whispered amongst themselves and then rolled a sizable cask of beer out to the foot of the oak tree. Wizard Radcliffe lost himself in quiet conversation with Baron Villebert. Having blown their noses, I love how gross this book is sometimes, the Baron's daughters gazed at Dandelion in adoration, which went entirely unnoticed by the bard, engrossed as he was in smiling, winking, and flashing his teeth at a haughty, silent group of roving elves, and at one of them in particular, a dark-haired, large-eyed beauty sporting a tiny ermine cap. Dandelion had rivals for her attention. The elf with her huge eyes and beautiful torque hat had caught his audience's interest as well, and a number of knights, students, Goliards were playing court to her with their eyes. The elf clearly enjoyed the attention, picking at the lace cuffs of her chemise and fluttering her eyelashes. But the group of elves with her surrounded her on all sides, not bothering to hide their antipathy toward her admirers. Okay, so I thought this was a pretty interesting introduction because that's not really what elves are like at all in this book. So the first introduction, we see it through the bard's eyes, and Dandelion, as you probably know from the games and the Netflix series and the books, of course, if you've read them, is a bit of a womanizer, a bit of a romantic, shall we say. So Dandelion, of course, is going to notice beauty, which we come to expect from this character. But we're introduced to this elf woman who doesn't really play a role beyond, just appearing. Her function in this case is to be a descriptor for elves, and she's very beautiful and very wealthy given her attire, right? She's in a very fine dress. She has a very fine hat on, made of fur, large eyes. The beautiful description doesn't quite throw me because in a lot of fantasy novels, elves are described as beautiful. Certainly in Dungeons and Dragons, they're often described as beautiful as well. So I don't know, chat. Can you think of an example where elves are not described as beautiful? Let me know, chat, because I'm really interested in this trope. Even in Scandinavian folklore, I was doing a little bit of research before I started this stream. And in Scandinavian folklore, elves have a negative reputation of being bewitching or spreading plague, but they're still meant to be extraordinarily beautiful and seductive. So humans will kind of fall under their spell. Whether or not they're magical, they just look so pretty that humans will do their bidding or become sick because of something an elf did because they're so attracted to elves. So that part didn't quite throw me. I was more interested in this description of this elf woman being very wealthy, because that's not really how elves are portrayed in the rest of the book. So I thought it was a curious introduction to elves as being, when I first read that, I thought, hey, maybe elves are like a noble class. I immediately thought of like the Blood Elves in World of Warcraft, or the Nightborn, or even the Night Elves, right? Even if they're more earthy, they still have this kind of, I don't know, when you live a long time, you can be interested in poetry and music and wine and fine clothes and fine things. Another question I have that I actually don't know the answer to, and I hope someone in chat does. I don't know if elves in the Witcher series live longer than humans, or witchers. I don't think they do. I've only read this book, The Blood of Elves, and I've started to read In the Time of Contempt. I'm about halfway through that book. So I'm not an expert on the representation of elves in this book by any means. I presume someone in chat is going to be much more well-versed on this than I am. So do let us know. Do elves live longer than humans in the Witcher series? Or maybe I should just Google it. I want to move on to the next section in the book. But I said we were going to be talking about elves and the representation of elves. I kind of got sidetracked when I was picking out excerpts to read on stream, because there's something that the book does really well that I think the game hints at, but the show doesn't cover at all, at least not yet. And this could be next season, right? There's confirmed a second season of the Netflix series, so I don't want to spoil anything for anyone, but something that I really appreciate about the book is it deals with magic in a realistic way, like magic realism, right? I think that's a literary term for it. So the Witcher drinks these potions, and as gamers, when we're playing the game, we just accept that they're health potions or strength potions or what have you. But in the book, it goes into a little bit more detail, and they talk about the tinctures and the potions that they're giving Ciri in her training as being basically a type of steroid. So it's an herbal mixture that functions the same way that we would think of the steroids that bodybuilders take, which is why it's having an endocrinal response in Ciri's development as a young woman. So I just want to read this passage as a sort of sidetrack to our discussion on elves, but it's going to feed back into the discussion of magic in the Witcher series in general, and the presentation of otherworldly, fantastical things is real. So in this scene, Ciri is being trained at Casmoden. Right? No, what's it called? where the Witchers are trained. Oh man, come on, brain. I've forgotten. The ancestral home where the Witchers train. Chat, feel free to correct me. And the mage Triss Marigold comes to check in on Ciri, and gets really upset because she realizes that the Witchers have been feeding her these special salad herbs and these special wine drinks and teas that are not appropriate for a young woman to have, or at least, I shouldn't say inappropriate. They're going to have effects on her biology. So Triss says that she'll let the Ciri continue her training as long as there's some conditions. Conditions? Oh, my phone scared me. This is too peaceful. Hold on, let me mute my phone. Otherwise I'm going to jump. Every single time. Okay, there we go. Conditions? Eskel was clearly worried. But we've already promised to ease Ciri's training, Triss. What other conditions do you want to impose? Well, maybe conditions isn't a very nice phrase, so let us call it advice. I will give you 3 pieces of advice, and you're going to abide by each of them. If, of course, you really want me to stay and help you bringing up a little one. We're listening, said Geralt. Go on, Triss. Above all, she began, smiling maliciously, Ciri's menu is to be more varied, and the secret mushrooms and mysterious greens in particular have to be limited. Geralt and Cohen controlled their expressions wonderfully. Lambert and Eskel a little less so. Vesemir not at all. But then, she thought, looking at his comically embarrassed expression, in his day the world was a better place. Duplicity was a character flaw to be ashamed of. Sincerity did not bring shame. Fewer infusions of your mystery-shrouded herbs, she continued, trying not to giggle, and more milk. You have goats here. Milking is no great art. You'll see, Lambert. You'll learn how to do it in no time. Triss, started Geralt. Listen. No, you listen. You haven't subjected Ciri to violent mutations, haven't touched her hormones, haven't tried any elixirs or grasses on her, and that's to be praised. That was sensible, responsible, and humane. You haven't harmed her with any of your poisons, all the more so you must not cripple her now. What are you talking about? The mushrooms whose secrets you guard so carefully, she explained, do indeed keep the girl wonderfully fit and strengthen her muscles. The herbs guarantee an ideal metabolic rate and hasten her development. All this taken together and helped along by grueling training causes certain changes in her build, in her adipose tissue. She is a woman, and as you haven't crippled her hormonal system, do not cripple her physically now. She might hold it against you later if you so ruthlessly deprive her of her womanly attributes. Do you understand what I'm saying? And how, muttered Lambert, brazenly eyeing Triss's breasts, which strained against the fabric of her dress. Eskel cleared his throat and looked daggers at the young Witcher. So I really like this excerpt because it deals with a very serious issue and takes the kind of fantasy and magic out of these potions and makes them a very real substance that we can relate to as modern people, right? They're essentially feeding Ciri either growth hormones or some sort of steroid to make her train more efficiently, and that's having or could have impacts on her hormonal development as a young woman. I think one of the things I appreciate most about the Witcher series, and something that the Netflix adaptation did really well, is all the sexual humor. I don't know, maybe some Americans get a little squeamish with that, but I personally find it very funny, very hilarious. Kaer Morhen. Yeah, what did I say, Khazmodan? That's the World of Warcraft dwarf home, isn't it? Thank you, chat. Thank you, LeFloik. How are you doing? I hope you're well. Okay, so that was my sidebar about how much I appreciate the magical realism of this book. We're going to get back to Elves. We're going to skip, that was page 91, 92, in case you were curious. You want to go read it for yourself, at least in the edition I'm reading. I got this edition from a local bookstore here in Salt Lake City, so there are local bookstores left if you choose to support them. Okay, here we go. It's about halfway. No, sorry, I hit the mic. Maybe a third of the way through the book, I want to say. It's actually quite a ways through. Oh, good, Like, I'm really glad you're doing well. You should read the books, or if you can get them on audio tape, you definitely should do that. The Yule log is very cozy. I'm feeling super cozy in my pajamas, essentially. And you're playing Ori in the Blind Forest. That's amazing. That sounds like the perfect night in. I've been hitting my. I was blessed. My grandfather got me a Advent wine calendar, so I've been working my way through that and reading near the fire every night. Not this fire, obviously, but I'm lucky enough to have installed a fireplace last winter. Okay, so the books are definitely worth reading. This is the first mention about a third of the way through the book that we're actually at war. We humans, I suppose, the world in The Witcher is at war with elves. And this, again, breaks with the fantasy tradition of having elves be good, right? I mean, arguably they still are good, but being at battle, having humans battling elves is not really something I've come across in fantasy. So in this case, it kind of, piqued my interest a little bit, and I became really interested in the world of The Witcher and in the story that they're trying to tell. So, here we go. Okay. So in this excerpt, the Triss, Ciri, and Geralt are on the road. They are transporting Ciri. I can't remember if this is when they're going to meet Yennefer or if they're taking Ciri to the Forest Watchers. But anyway, they're transporting Ciri, and Triss got quite ill. So they have run into a group of folks on the same path, on the same trail that they're on, and they stopped to rest and to ask for some assistance. So they run into these soldiers and explain that Triss is not well. Lay her there, by the wounded men, the soldier indicated the shelter. Oh, sir, it is truly bad luck she's sick. A few of our men were hurt during the battle, and we wouldn't turn down a bit of magical assistance. When we pulled the arrow out of one of them, its head stuck in his guts. The lad will peter out by the morning. He'll peter out like anything. And the enchantress who could have saved him is tossing and turning with a fever and seeking help from us. A bad time, I say, a bad time. He broke off, seeing that the Witcher could not tear his eyes from the sack-wrapped bodies. 2 guards from here, 2 of our relief troops, and two of the others, he said, pulling up a corner of the stiff material. Take a look if you wish. Ciri, step away. I want to see too, the girl leaned out around him, staring at the corpses with her mouth open. Step away, please. Take care of Triss. I'm trying to do a deep Geralt voice, but I can't. I can't, unfortunately, a little bit. Ciri huffed, unwilling, but obeyed. Geralt clinged closer. Elves, he noted, not hiding his surprise. Elves, the soldier confirmed. Scoatel. That's how I pronounce it. I've actually never heard this word said out loud. So again, Witcher buffs, you can tell me how to pronounce this. The name of the guerrilla soldiers, the elven guerrilla soldiers, it's spelled Scoia apostrophe Tael. I'm sure when you're doing readings, you should never admit to not knowing how to pronounce something and then spell it, but I'm breaking all the rules. It's my Twitch channel. I can do it. Scoatel, repeated the soldier. Forest bands. Strange name. Means squirrels, if I'm not mistaken? Yes, sir. Squirrels. That's what they call themselves in Elvish. Some say it's because they wear squirrel tails on their fur caps and hats. Others say it's because they live in the woods and eat nuts. They're getting more and more troublesome, I tell you. Geralt shook his head. The soldier covered the bodies again and wiped his hands on his tunic. Come, he said. There's no point in standing here. I'll take you to our commandant. Our corporal will take care of your patient if he can. He knows how to sear and stitch wounds and set bones, so maybe he knows how to mix up medicines and whatnot too. He's a brainy chap, a mountain man. Come on, Witcher. So we see that the elves, this is the second time, I think. Now I have this on paperback, so if I had it on an ebook, I would have just searched for mentions of elves in the book. But to my recollection, the first time we see an elf is that very fine, beautiful woman that Dandelion is obsessed with around the tree with the merchants. The second time we see an elf is a corpse, which is this brutal, Sapkowski doesn't pull any punches, right? It's okay. An exquisite corpse, I suppose, right? Where we dive deep into the politics pretty quickly after being introduced to the elves. So Geralt is pretty shocked to see that these are corpses of elves. He's not quite sure why the Scoia'tael would be attacking this particular band of individuals, or why there's a war going on. So when he meets the commandant, they start having a conversation about the war and what's happening between the elves. So I've prepared another excerpt that I'd like to read, and then I want to have a more in-depth discussion about the representation of elves as the other, when I think at least I am used to elves being represented as the familiar, right? Okay. I thought I turned my phone off. Okay, there we go. Okay, so Geralt goes and meets this knight, and the knight says, "Geralt of Rivia," he repeated, still smiling. "I have heard about you, and not just from gossip and hearsay. What brings you here?" Geralt explained what brought him there. The knight's smile faded. "You have not come at a good time, or at a good place. We are at war here, Witcher. A band of Scoia'tael is doing the rounds, and there was a skirmish yesterday. I am waiting here for relief forces, and then we'll start a counterattack." "You're fighting elves?" "Not just elves. Is it possible? Have you, a Witcher, not heard of the squirrels?" "No, I haven't." "Where have you been these past 2 years? Beyond the seas?" "Here in Cadwyn, the Scoia'tael have made sure everybody's talking about them. They've seen to it only too well. The first bands appeared just after the war with Nilfgaard broke out. The cursed non-humans took advantage of our difficulties. We were fighting in the south, and they began a guerrilla campaign at our rear. They counted on the Nilfgaardians defeating us, declaring it was the end of human rule, and that there would be a return to old order. Humans to the sea! That's their battle cry, as they murder, burn, and plunder. It's your own fault and your own problem," the Grieve commented glumly, tapping his thigh with a notched stick, a mark of his position. "Yours and all the other noblemen and knights. You're the ones who oppressed the non-humans, would not allow them their way of life, so now you pay for it. While we've always moved goods this way and no one stopped us, we didn't need an army." "What's true is true," said one of the merchants who had been sitting silently on a bench. "The squirrels are no fiercer than the bandits who used to roam these ways. And who did the elves take in hand first? The bandits." "What do I care if it's a bandit or an elf who runs me through with an arrow from behind some bushes?" the toll collector with the bandage head said suddenly. "The thatch, if it's set on fire above my head in the night, burns just the same. What difference does it make who lit the firebrand? You say, sir, the Scoia'tael are no worse than the bandits? You lie. The bandits wanted loot, but the elves are after human blood. Not everyone has ducats, but we all have blood running through our veins. You say it is the nobility's problem, Grieve? That's an even greater folly. What about the lumberjacks shot in the clearing, the tar makers hacked to pieces in the beaches, the refugee peasants from the burned-down hamlets? Did they hurt the non-humans? They lived and worked together as neighbors, and suddenly they got an arrow in the back. And me? Never in my life have I harmed a non-human. And look, my head is broken open by a dwarf a dwarf's cutlass. And if it were not for the soldiers you're snapping at, I'd be laying beneath an ell of turf. Exactly, the knight in the yellow surcoat thumped his fist against the table once again. We are protecting your mangy skin, Grieve, from those, as you call them, oppressed elves, who, according to you, we did not let live. But I will say something different. We have emboldened them too much. We tolerated them, treated them as humans, as equals, and now they are stabbing us in the back. Nilfgaard is paying them for it. Paid protesters, right? Sorry, maybe this came a little too spicy. Nilfgaard is paying them for it. I'd stake my life, and the savage elves from the mountains are furnishing them with arms. But their real support comes from those who always lived among us, from the elves, half-elves, dwarves, gnomes, halflings. They are the ones who are hiding them, feeding them, supplying them with volunteers. Okay, so then the argument goes on with the soldiers and the merchants. Some of whom defend the elves, right? Who say, the majority of non-humans condemn the elves' actions. They condemn the violent protests. It's not necessarily that clearly divided on racial lines, where elves support the squirrels' guerrilla warfare tactics, and other folks are disagreeing with that. What I quite enjoy about this particular excerpt is, again, not a literary scholar, an amateur historian at best, but if you read about the pogroms that happened prior to World War II in Poland, there's an echo there, right? Where neighbors had lived next door to each other for generations, and then suddenly when the Nazis took power, it was neighbor versus neighbor, right? They were all the same until they became different. And I quite like that this excerpt kind of uses fantasy terminology to say we have halflings and dwarves and elves and half-elves, but they were our neighbors, but now they're not. Now they're suddenly different. And we've seen that historically time and time again. That's what happens, right? Everything's good until it's not, and then people look for reasons to distinguish one group of people from another group of people and punish whichever group is seen as the outsider or is seen as deserving punishment. No one deserves punishment, of course. But from a fantasy book, right? I was not expecting that hard of a hit. So reading that, I immediately thought back to my undergraduate degree when I had studied, the most evil aspects of humanity and when people turn against their neighbors. And here it is in this fantasy book with my World of Warcraft elves and dwarves, and that actually made my jaw fall open. So it's lovely storytelling in addition to the message, of course. It's lovely storytelling as well because the Witchers keep to themselves, right? They're supposedly don't have an alliance. They perform a service for anyone. They aren't supposed to have an allegiance necessarily to humans or elves or dwarves or anything. So being an outsider and being locked away, looking after Ciri for the past couple of years, Geralt doesn't have any idea of what the political state of the world is in, and he's learning a lot, and so are we. We're learning a lot very quickly. So we're first introduced to this very small world of a few main characters and training and learning about the fact there are monsters in this world, and there's some sort of political strife going on, and now we see this political strife played out in a very violent and real way. So Geralt and Ciri spend some time with this group of merchants. So much time we're almost halfway through the book at this point. And they're waiting for Triss to get better. They're also going the same direction anyway, so they decide to just group up. And Ciri, we hear a bit more about the political situation from Ciri's perspective. So her ears perk up and she kind of listens to what people are saying, which is really important because we know who Ciri really is, right? So as a potential monarch or ruler, it's pretty important that she hears this stuff and that she's interested in this stuff. But this is going to be really foundational to her as a character. So, they're still trying. I don't know that they're trying to keep her identity hidden for obvious reasons, if you've played the game or seen the Netflix show. So Ciri's eavesdropping in this scene, and she gets caught. Yarpen, who I believe is a gnome or a dwarf, I think. Maybe a gnome. Right. So this gnome has just caught Ciri eavesdropping. And he says, "You've got pretty good hearing, girl, like a marmot." He grinned broadly. "You're also a bit too bright for someone destined to give birth, cook, and spin." "You think you know everything, don't you? That's because you're a brat. Don't pull silly faces. Faces like that don't make you look any older, just uglier than usual. You grasp the nature of the Scoatels quickly. You like the slogans. You know why you understand them so well? Because the Scoatel are brats too. They're little snot heads who don't understand that they're being egged on, that someone's taking advantage of their childish stupidity by feeding them slogans about freedom." "But they really are fighting for freedom." Ciri raised her head and gazed at the... dwarf. That's how good my memory is. Ciri raised her head and gazed at the dwarf with wide open green eyes. "Like the dryads in the Brooklyn woods. They kill people because some people are harming them. Because this used to be your country, the dwarveses and the elveses, and those halflingses and gnomeses and other... And now people are here. So the elves..." "Elves," snorted Yarpen. "They, to be accurate, happen to be strangers just as much as you humans, although they arrived in their white ships a good 1,000 years before you. Now they're competing with each other to offer us friendship. Suddenly we're all brothers. Now they're grinning and saying, 'We kinsmen, we the elf races.' But before their arrows used to whistle past our ears when we were... So the first on Earth were dwarves? Gnomes, to be honest. As far as this part of the world is concerned. Because the world is unimaginably huge, Ciri. I know, I saw a map. You couldn't have. No one's drawn a map like that. And I doubt they ever will in the near future. No one knows what exists beyond the mountains of fire and the great sea. Even elves, although they claim to know everything. They know shit all, I tell you. But now there are far more people than there are of you. Because you multiply like rabbits," the dwarf ground his teeth. "You do nothing but screw day in and day out, without discrimination, with just about anyone and anywhere. And it's enough for your women to just sit on a man's trousers and it makes their bellies swell." I'm sorry. This is back to that humor that I really appreciate about this book. But it's quite crass. And I like it. I think Ciri's supposed to be like 12 or 13 around this time. So she's like exhibiting that preteen curiosity, but is like embarrassed by everything. So Yarpen the dwarf goes on, "Why have you gone so red? Crimson as a poppy. You wanted to know, didn't you? Well, you've got the honest truth and faithful history of a world where he who shatters the skulls of others most efficiently and swells women's bellies fastest reigns. And it's just as hard to compete with you people in murdering as it is in screwing." "Yarpen," said Geralt coldly, riding up on Roach. "Restrain yourself a little, if you please, with your choice of words. And Ciri, stop playing at being a coach woman." I don't want to switch to waves crashing on a beach. Will that go away? Hopefully that goes away. "And have a care for Triss. Check if she's awake and needs anything." Okay, good. I thought we were going to be transported to a beach. "I've been awake for a long time," the magician said weakly from the depths of the wagon, "but I didn't want to interrupt this interesting conversation. Don't disturb them, Geralt. I like to learn more about the role of screwing in the evolution of society." Triss is by far one of my favorite characters. She's very, very funny. Okay, so here's my bookmark. So that was on page 173 through 175. And Ciri's curiosity, not just about screwing, I suppose, to use the terms of the book, is really interesting and refreshing, because we get a really in-depth look at the history of this universe. We learn that this echoed Game of Thrones for me, but only because I think the books came out right around the same time. Game of Thrones is probably a little bit earlier. I'm not terribly sure. This book first came out in 94. But this book came out in Polish. Game of Thrones came out in English. Whatever. Okay. Point being that the idea of birthright is challenged, right? So Ciri goes, oh, but I thought the elves were here first, and therefore they can lay birthright claim to the land, which is why they're so upset that humans have taken over. And the dwarf says, well, no, actually, it was the dwarves that were here first. And whether or not this is true is irrelevant, right? It just pokes holes in the philosophy that whomsoever was from a region has claim to it, right? Or that by birthright, then this. So yes, this land should have been the dwarves. The dwarves were happy to share with the elves, happy to share with humans too, but humans became too powerful, outbred the elves and the dwarves, and now there's a resource management problem. This is, again, a story as old as time, right? We have this echoed politically throughout our political and economic histories. So I really like that the book is using elves and dwarves to tell very serious stories about racism and sexism and colonialism and even worse. Okay, so the picture we have of elves so far is that they're an old race, but not even the oldest race. The dwarves look at them as a younger race, even though they're much older than humans, and that they also invaded's the wrong term, but they're not native to the land that they're on either. And that they're trying to strike an alliance with the other races. So I have a bit of a long chunk to read in the next excerpt because the book ends, well, the book goes on to flesh out more stories about the Nilfgaardians and about Ciri and about Ciri's relationship with femininity and Yennefer and Renitz and a whole load of other characters. So we kind of depart from the political discussion of the elves. But on page 192, we shift back to seeing elves as beautiful. So we started the book out seeing the first lady elf in her finery, and then we went in to look at corpses of elves and this war with the squirrels. And then we have this small little reprieve where we can see the beauty of elven culture after it's been talked about in such a negative way by Yarpen and by the merchants and all the folks that Geralt and Ciri are traveling with. So Ciri was scouting and was riding ahead from the wagon party and happened upon a group of elves, and she kind of gets scared. Geralt's with her, and a leather glove falls across her mouth, muffling the scream of fear. So Geralt kind of sneaks up on her, and he says, "Be quiet." "Geralt, quiet," I said. "You saw them?" "I did." "It's them," she whispered. "Scoia'tael, isn't it?" "Yes. Quick, back to the horses. Watch your feet." They rode carefully and silently down the slope without returning to the trail. They remained in the thicket. Geralt looked around, alert. He did not allow her to ride independently. He did not give her the chestnut's reins. He led the horse himself. "Ciri," he said suddenly, "not a word about what we saw. Not to Yarpen, not to Winnock, not to anybody. Understand?" No, she grunted, lowering her head. I don't understand. Why shouldn't I say anything? They have to be warned. Whose side are we on, Geralt? Whose side are we against? Who's our friend and who's our enemy? We'll part with the convoy tomorrow, he said after a moment's silence. Triss is almost recovered. We'll say our goodbyes and go our own way. We have problems of our own worries, and our own difficulties. Then I hope you'll finally stop dividing the inhabitants of this world into friends and enemies. We're to be neutral? Indifferent? Is that right? And if they attack, they won't. And if, listen to me, he turned to her. Why do you think such a vital load of gold and silver, King Hensel's secret agent, is being escorted by dwarves and not humans? I saw an elf watching us from a tree yesterday. I heard them pass by our camp during the night. The Scoia'tael will not attack the dwarves, Ciri. But they're here, she muttered. They are. They're moving around, surrounding us. I know why they're here, and I'll show you. He turned the horse abruptly and threw the reins to her. She kicked the chestnut with her heels and moved away faster, but he motioned for her to stay behind him. They cut across the trail and re-entered the wild forest. The Witcher led, Ciri following in his tracks. Neither said anything. Not for a long time. Look, Geralt had back his horse. Look, Ciri. What is it? Shaerwed. In front of them, as far as the woods allowed them to see, rose smoothly hewn blocks of granite and marble with blunt corners, worn away by the winds, decorated with patterns long leached out by the rains, cracked and shattered by frost, split by tree roots. Amongst the trunks, broken columns flashed white. Arcades, the remains of ornamental friezes, entwined with ivy and wrapped in a thick layer of green moss. This was a castle? A palace. The elves didn't build castles. Dismount. The horses won't manage in the rubble. Who destroyed it all? Humans? No, they did. Before they left. Why? They knew they wouldn't be coming back. It happened following their second clash with the humans more than 200 years ago. Before that, they used to leave towns untouched when they retreated. Humans used to build on the foundations left by the elves. That's how Novigrad, Oxenfurt, Wyzma, Tredogor, Maribor, and Sedaris were built. And Sintra. Sintra? He confirmed it with a nod of his head, not taking his eyes off the ruins. They left, whispered Ciri, but now they're coming back. Why? To have a look. At what? Without a word, he laid his hand on her shoulder and pushed her gently before him. They jumped down the marble stairs, climbing down, holding onto the springy hazel, clusters of which had burst through every gap, every crevice in the moss-covered cracked plates. This was the center of the palace, its heart, a fountain. Here? She asked, surprised, gazing at the dense thicket of elders and white birch trunks amongst the misshapen blocks and slabs. Here? But there's nothing there. Come. The stream feeding the fountain must have changed its course many times, patiently and constantly washing the marble blocks and alabaster plates which had sunk or fallen to form dams, once again changing the course of the current. As a result, the whole area was divided up by shallow gullies. Here and there water cascaded over the remains of the building, washing it clean of leaves, sand, and litter. In these places, the marble, terracotta, and mosaics were still as vibrant with color, as fresh as if they had been laying there for 3 days, not 2 centuries. I'm going to pause there for a second, because this is a chunky block of text. I would say this is the first time in the book where we really get a lot of description about a place. So typically in the book has very rich descriptions of what characters look like and very rich descriptions of food and of smells. But in terms of places, when we go to the Mage Hall, for example, it's like, oh, there's a table and some walls. And that's kind of the only description we get for a palace of mages, right? That's intense. A mage tower, I'm picturing like Karazhan. So it struck me as really interesting. This particular passage of the book stood out to me because Sapkowski's spending so much time describing the layout of this particular, what do you call it, palace? Yeah, called it a palace. They didn't build castles, they built palaces. So there's a lot of attention to detail being paid to this palace. And partially, I think that is to illustrate the beauty of elven architecture. And we've seen that elves are pretty. We've seen that they're warriors, but we haven't really heard or seen anything of elf culture, even through Dandelion's perspective. So even the bard doesn't really talk about what elves do, or what their religion is, or what kind of food they eat. There's really no information about elven culture until we get to this point. So it's, in a way, this is a really inappropriate term, but in a way it humanizes the elves. The elves do have a culture. It's just one that has been taken over by humans and rewritten. Okay, I'm going to go back to reading more. Geralt leapt across the stream and went in amongst what remained of the columns.
All right.
Thanks for the follow, naughty name. Geralt leapt across the stream and went in amongst what remained of the columns. Ciri followed. They jumped off the ruined stairs and lowered their heads, walked beneath the untouched arch of the arcade, half buried beneath a mound of earth. The Witcher stopped and indicated with his hand. Ciri sighed loudly. From the rubble, colorful with smashed terracotta, grew an enormous rose bush covered with beautiful white lilied flowers. Drops of dew as bright as silver glistened on the petals. The bush wove its shoots around a large slab of white stone, and from it a sad, pretty face looked out from them. The downpours and snows had not yet managed to blur or wash away its delicate and noble features. It was a face which the chisels of plunderers digging out golden ornaments, mosaics, and precious stones from the relief sculpture had not managed to disfigure. Eilírin, said Geralt after a long silence. She's beautiful, whispered Ciri, grabbing him by the hand. The Witcher didn't seem to notice. He stared at the sculpture and was far away in a different world and time. Eilírin, he repeated after a while, known as Elerena by dwarves and humans. She led them into battle 200 years ago. The elders of the elves were against it. They knew they had no chance, that they would not be able to pick themselves up after the defeat. They wanted to save their people, wanted to survive. They decided to destroy their towns and retreat to the inaccessible, the wild mountains, and to wait. Elves live a long time, Ciri. By our time scale, they're almost eternal. Okay, well, there's the answer to that question I had earlier in the stream. And in a section of the book that I picked out to read on stream too. Okay. Well, that's, it's finals time. Been grading a lot. They thought humans were doing something that would pass, like a drought, like a heavy winter, or a plague of locusts, after which comes rain, spring, a new harvest. They wanted to sit it out, survive. They decided to destroy their towns and palaces, amongst them their pride, the beautiful Sherwood. They wanted to weather out the storm, but Elena stirred up the young. They took up arms and followed her into their last desperate battle, and they were massacred, mercilessly massacred. Ciri did not say anything, staring at the beautiful, still face. They died with her name on their lips, the Witcher continued quietly. Repeating her challenge, her cry, they died for Sherwood, because Sherwood was a symbol. They died for the stone and marble, and for Erilyn, just as she promised them. They died with dignity, heroically and honorably. They saved their honor, but they brought nothing but ruin as a result, condemned their own race to annihilation, their own people. You remember what Yarpen told you? Those who rule the world and those who die out? He explained it to you coarsely but truly. Elves live for a long time, but only their youngsters are fertile. Only the young can have offspring, and practically all elven youngsters had followed Elriana. They followed Erilyn, the white rose of Sherwood. We are standing in the ruins of her palace, by the fountain whose waters she listened to in the evenings, and these These were her flowers. Ciri was silent. Geralt drew her to himself and put his arm around her. Do you know why, now, the Scoia'tael were here? Do you see why they wanted to look at it? And do you understand why the elven and dwarven young must not be allowed to be massacred once again? Do you understand why neither you nor I are permitted to have a hand in this massacre? These roses flower all year round. They ought to have grown wild by now, but they are more beautiful than any rose in a tended garden. Elves continue to come to Sherwood, Ciri. A variety of elves. The impetuous and the foolish ones for whom the crackstone is a symbol, as well as for the sensible ones for whom these immortal, forever reborn flowers are a symbol. Elves who understand that if this bush is torn from the ground and the earth burned out, the roses of Sherwood will never flower again. Do you understand? She nodded. Do you understand what this neutrality is, which stirs you so? To be neutral does not mean to be indifferent or insensitive. You don't have to kill your feelings. It is enough to kill hatred within yourself. Do you understand? This is a passage that gives me goosebumps, because it's when we see Geralt, who's been so tight-lipped and stubborn and gruff. This is when we see him be a dad, and like a really good dad at that. Or even though, Ciri's not his biological child, but he takes this guardianship role of her, and he literally goes off the beaten path through the woods to educate Ciri on this piece of history that wouldn't be taught to her otherwise. And then goes beyond that to situate the history within terms that she can understand. So not only age appropriate, right, but within the current political system. You want to know why we're neutral. We're not neutral because we don't care. We're neutral because this is not our war. I like that. You don't have to kill your feelings. It's enough to kill hatred within yourself. Okay, so there's a little bit more that I want to read before we'll talk about this passage. Geralt says, "Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. "I understand. Geralt, I'd like to take one of these roses, to remind me. May I?" "Do," he said after some hesitation. "Do in order to remember. Let's go now. Let's return to the convoy." Ciri pinned the rose under the lacing of her jerkin. Suddenly she cried out quietly, lifted her hand. A trickle of blood ran from her finger down her palm. "Did you prick yourself?" "Yarpen," whispered the girl, looking at the blood filling her lifeline. "Winnick. Polly." "What?" "Triss," she shouted with a piercing voice, which was not hers. She shuddered fiercely and wiped her face with her arm. "Quick, Geralt, we've got to help. To the horses. Geralt." "Ciri, what's happening?" "They're dying." So we're going to leave the book on that very, very suspenseful note, shall we? If you want to find out what happens, you have to read the book. You have to go get the book on audio tape or buy the book and read it, because it is very suspenseful and very engaging, and one of the best books I've read in a long time. I actually read it, I think I mentioned this earlier, I read it over the summer while in my backyard, soaking up all the sun. So it's very fun to read it in winter with a crackling fire. It's a very different experience. So we see a bit of elfin culture, right? So Ciri and Geralt show us the ruins of a palace and talk about sort of the elfin way of life before humans got there, right? And learning that human capital cities, the major players in the political game, as far as we know it, as it's been laid out for us before, were all in essence built off of the elves. Humans conquered, took over, and made elfin settlements their own. This is, again, quite different, a very different fantasy narrative regarding elves than we're used to. I'm thinking, the classic Lord of the Rings, the elves are the kind of awkward outsiders that are helpful to humans but keep to themselves. Certainly humans have not, could not, and would not try and start a war with the elves. So the idea, if you can think of like the Rohirrim taking over Rivendell, that's like bonkers, right? That would never happen in Tolkien's world, and yet here we are. The reason I think I like this so much is it turns the trope of anyone being innocent. I suppose the problem I have with a lot of fantasy novels is that they tend to recreate the stories, the Canterbury tales, right? The folkloric tales we have that are told now to children, but were told in the Middle Ages around campfires, these bardic stories where someone is the victor, someone is the hero, someone is righteous and good, and someone is evil and bad. And we know the world isn't that black and white, so I don't want to insult anyone's intelligence here, but I think this book does a really good job of even taking the most angelic beings, right, in fantasy literature of the elves and being like, well, this is complicated. Technically, the elves were invaders, so they don't really have a claim to this land, but they were quite peaceful, and now the humans have taken over, so are the humans in the wrong? Yeah. Were the elves also in the wrong? Probably. Now the elves are attacking humans. Should the humans defend themselves? Well, yeah, I guess. It's all very complicated and very muddy. And I think that's what draws a lot of people to the Witcher series, to the games, and to the books, and to the Netflix shows, is that no one comes out clean, right? Everyone is well, in the words of the book, in the shit. Triss Marigold, quite literally, at the moment. All right, well, that is all I have for tonight. Next week, I will be, well, I'm fundraising the whole month. Next Monday, I'm going to be baking cookies in my kitchen, and that's going to be a really fun setup to try and figure out. I'm going to be making marranitos, which is a molasses-baked cookie from Mexico that isn't really a Christmas cookie, but it is one of my favorite cookies of all time, and I don't know where I can get them where I live, so I'm going to make them from scratch, and it's going to be very fun. I have cute little corgi cookie cutters, so it should be really cute. The next time I'm going live, though, is Wednesday. I will be streaming Euligans Part 2. So I think we played the game Naughty. Now we're going to try and play the game Nice. So we will be streaming at 7 p.m. I'll be joined by the regular old crew, and we will be trying to save Christmas this time, theoretically. Maybe help Krampus a little bit. Who knows? But I will be streaming on Wednesday for Feeding America. Feeding America is such a worthwhile charity, so please consider making a donation, however small you can, to get us toward our $1,000 goal and get some food on the table at Christmas. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Anonymous, for the $50 donation. Are you kidding me? That is so incredibly generous. We've met our 1 milestone, so I'll be dressing up like Krampus at some point. And we got our cookie baking stream. We are now $200? Yeah, we're just $200 away from hitting our next milestone, which is a corgi stream. I'll stream corgis playing in the snow. It'll be super fun. But thank you so much for everyone who's donated. I am absolutely humbled and so grateful and thankful for all the donations we received. And I'm sure the folks at Feeding America are also super happy for it. So thanks to you, kind souls, a few more people will have food in their bellies this Christmas, which is more than a Witcher can ask for. Thank you all so very much for tuning in. Feel free to give me a follow, all that good stuff. I will see you on Wednesday, and thank you so much for your continued generosity. I really, really appreciate it. Bye, everyone. Have a good night. Thank you.